critical work, and the aftermarket that their work has a value, has a quality. Okay, sorry. Yes. I don't want to say that the role of the work is to have a didactic role, of course, to have a meaning, but I want just to say that sometimes those explosions, they have a very narcissist orientation.
Yeah, maybe what we could...
Why criticize the donation? This money.
Well, it's okay.
The poetry of Phoebe or the other works is not against anybody.
Yeah, I'm not against, but I'm trying to describe that. Yes.
Maybe what
it makes a
could
point.
be added to that, I agree with you about this, let's say, authority of antiquity of validating contemporary practices and its central fascinations of contemporary artists, I would say. And maybe another layer would be this a form of nostalgia, especially the iconographies of the antique, which is another symptom of contemporary artistic practices, and a form of nostalgia which almost becomes a caricature of the past.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to say, I think both of these points are so incisive because they each in their own way hit it what to me feels like the paradoxes, the kinds of tensions of the project. So I very much agree that something that emerged over the course of doing the project and the artist interviews was a sense that the book, in trying to disrupt iconoclasticism, was also inscribing it by setting this up. What's classical about your work? What's the connection with antiquity? And my sense is that the interviews are all very different, and I think that both the lexemes and the ways in which they multiply the notions of classicism, and some of the interviews that with artists who are really much more engaged with thinking classicism more critically, which would include, I think, everyone in this room, make the statements that are made at other points, which seem like, okay, yes, I'm engaged with the class, like, I'm worried a little bit, like it's, okay, my market value is going to go up. Like, that's different. I've seen it in the conversations in some ways around the project, like, but what happens when those statements are put in this context? The hope is it disrupts this kind of, I mean, when we were talking about Shuttles, this kind of move, this resurgence of classicism. Like, I do hope that there's a way in which the form and experiment of this project undermines its complicity with the use of classicism as a way of just gaining value from the past, or from, like, okay, my work is part of this bigger tradition. I've seen it. That my position as a classicist, and Richard, I'd be curious what you think about this, is like, to step in and engage the classicist tendencies can also be to just validate, to in our most authorizing way, to be like, okay, this is worth something because of the past, which is exactly the notion of value the project is trying to undermine. The other thing, just to go back to Dustin, what you were saying, I mean, that another really, like, the serious tension of the project is precisely this rhizomatic, liquid, networked, very Deleuzian notion of a text. And there's a separate point that I don't want to go into because I don't want to monopolize, but like between this question of the complicity of the rhizome and capitalism or the algorithm that I think has been noted by people, and I would question whether it's made impossible by that's another story, so let's not go there, we can come back to it. But okay, so the tension between the rhizome and attention. And that was why I resist the idea of the fragment, and there was always a sense that somehow that someone, and it was me in the end, had to sort of make this thing cohere, but to do it in a way that wasn't like, this is the only way we could make a world of this text, but to at the same time model a way of not just putting a lot of stuff out there and letting people do whatever, but like the introduction with the lexemes and the fact that like that was the challenge, was people produced their lexemes. And then I wrote the text with those 27 words in mind, and I tried to make a world out of them. And so, I had my own ideas, but they were also really informed by the choices that others had made. I tried to kind of have moments of intertext that were both kind of knowing or engaged with, dialogically engaged with the lexemes, but also didn't shut down, so it was like the lexeme is a gloss on what I'm saying, or I'm glossing in a restricted way. But that's why the structure is both this proliferation of voices and this kind of insistence that in some of the opening remarks, I'm like, okay, it's not a whole. It's the chimeric whole. It's an organism. But like I was from the beginning. I mean, you remember Polina and yours. It's not the fragment. It's not only the fragment. It's somehow modeling an attention of synthesizing, the synthesizing mind. It's not the only one, but something is here trying to hold this thing together in a way that will invite the reader to hold it together in their own way, and not to just take it up as it could be anything. And I don't know if that works, but for me, like, it's the struggle between reimposing an organismic kind of vitalist conception of teleology and just saying, okay, this is just make what you will of this. And the last thing I'll say, like, for me, I have I feel like a kind of fraught relationship with the notion of deconstruction and even critique to some level, as I don't want classicism to just be something that it has a wholeness and we just break it down. We're always defined by inverting, that like we make our own worlds. Like, I think this notion of cosmopoiesis, we make our own worlds in order to live with the past, and there's some responsibility that we have in our attention, and the very specific attentions we all have, to make those worlds in such a way that others can live with us in them, and that we all bring those world-making capacities to the table. And, so that was, so you really hit on something that mattered to me. And so I really appreciate both of these interventions are like, yes, this was the problem. These were both like two of the biggest problems with the book.
Well, I think liquid antiquity was in a way an excuse for me to go into issues that are of more general concern, and the issue of attention is something that I have been working on lately, because I observe in very different situations, be that relationships, how people are in class, because we talked about classrooms, we talk about huge problems of attention with children, so attention is an issue. And all this bombarding of information, this anxiety we have to produce information, enrich reading lists, diminish this, provide, all this is fair enough. On the other hand, attention is an entirely different matter.
What do you see the relation between attention and curation as care? Or, I mean, care for me is sort of the, choices. Like, these are, it's a theme that's starting to come up that I find is differently inflected with each of those terms. But I'd be curious how, for you, attention is similar.
Do you know the Simone Weil quote, attention is the highest form of generosity?
That's great.
Attention is the highest form. I've got it on a t-shirt.
That, like, enacts
I can wear it tomorrow. I can wear it tomorrow.
Now that you've read this, thank you for the gift.
Or attention and digestion.
Sorry.
You mentioned in the morning.
So there is one way of approaching the issue of attention, which I think is more traditional, and establishes more linear relations like sender and receiver, producer, mediator, consumer. Curators, for me, are a problematic category.
It's your opinion.
Did we find
I don't have a fixed opinion about curators. Some of them I love them, some of them
You don't love it.
But it is not a personal thing.
Attention, on the other hand, is a context of performance, and it has to involve at least two people, if not more. You talk about a guard or a tour guide in a museum. It makes a huge difference when you walk around the museum with a person that shares stories with you. I remember an exhibition at the Yanadios Library
Yes.
Oh, that's part of the document.
No,
No.
no,
Of the
no.
neon code.
Now. The now.
1,000 doors.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first exhibition of Neon Foundation.
What I liked, I didn't know much about the exhibition, but I liked the fact that the people who were working with the visitors
Yeah.
in the rooms of the museum had been put together in a room. Some stories about the artwork were presented to them. They didn't learn it off by heart. They kept whatever they wanted. So you had some good companions and some less good. So sometimes you would visit, I visited the exhibition 3 times, same room with a different person, different things.
I think that is the general policy of the Neon Foundation, because I'm collaborating now with a new project. And I know that the policy is to explain very clearly what the art is gonna display and the historical context of the place. I think it is a central policy of the Neon Foundation to be very to have an easy access about the information
Right, I
of
have to say
that some people maybe it's like, especially the specialists. Even me, I remember myself specialist. Sometimes I feel embarrassed by the fact that someone is next to me and he explains me all the time the whole story. Because I want to contemplate. I have the right to contemplate also, not to know something.
But there are
didactically,
there are
you know?
many ways.
Yes, there are many ways. Of
There are
course.
many ways, and I think
also.
there are many ways.
Yes.
There are many people. There are many media,
It is welcome. It is
I
welcome.
have
and we
experienced
need to
negative.
experiment each time according to the. I don't believe in recipes when it
Yeah.
comes to how we will cultivate the art of
Yeah.
attention, because it's a creative process to begin with, and how we attract attention, how we give attention to something changes from situation to situation. I just want to make a very small point I wanted to make before. Maybe you'll find it interesting, maybe not. In the early 1970s, Yorgos Kourmouziadis organized, he's a very famous Greek archaeologist who has worked on prehistoric material. He organized an exhibition at the Museum of Volos. This was, we're talking about the early 1970s. It was a groundbreaking exhibition for several reasons. One of them was that his vision, what he wanted to send as a message to the public, was that the museum is not a temple of art, but rather a school. And in fact, a school where we don't teach the visitor, but we learn from the visitor. And that was particularly fascinating because what he did, the basis of his argument was that Neolithic life is very close to how farm life is in the wider area of Thessaly at this very moment. So the types of objects that people use, their routines, their practices are very compatible to what happened 1,000 years ago. So why not exhibit the finds without labels, without captions, since people will recognize them? He didn't put captions in any of the exhibits. I repeat, early 1970s. If I'm not mistaken, in 2004, after pressure of the visitors, captions were put to the finds. Were the visitors that were, because they're not farmers anymore, though, isn't it?
Yeah, so
Were they
have
ever
any
farmers?
special personal reference?
I know this
Exhibition.
very well.
It's one room, actually.
On the one hand,
It's
there were
still,
no-
it's
there-
still
Still
there.
on, intact,
So
apart from the
there
caption.
were no captions, but the objects were staged, so the staging
Was also very
is the
important.
caption. But also
In a way of to draw attention
Yes.
to the object.
Yeah.
Different lighting, taking them out of
But this
the
was
window.
an oral, non-literate culture.
Yes.
Could you do such a thing with
Wouldn't that be fascinating, though?
It would be different. It would
It would be
a different
different.
kind of challenge.
But it would be a good idea to examine how would it look like if it was silenced.
You could argue that many people without their phones are part of an oral non-literate culture.
Without their phones.
Yeah. Like if you were entering into a space without, I think that there is certain kind of reliance on information being accessible through Google, through this kind of thing, that then taken away from that, we're starting to get back to that farmer simplicity.
But without the knowledge of the farmer.
Oh yeah, exactly. Sorry, no knowledge of the farmer,
yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about care, going back to care at the beginning and attention, because one of the things that, as anyone engaging with any other human being knows, I mean, to get somebody's attention means to somehow engage their concern. And you'd also really briefly mentioned nostalgia. So I wanted to
think so.
Yeah, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about what kind of emotional investment, and this is a huge question, but I think we could narrow it down. What kinds of emotional investments are we asking of the publics we might try to engage when it comes to classicisms and classical antiquity? Because we're so suspicious of many of the old traditional emotional investments that were tied to hierarchy, to hierarchies of oppression and power. And destructive authority. So if we want to set those aside, what new kinds of emotional investments are we eager to build that are effective? I mean, that hook into people's sense of care, especially in an era where, partly thanks to our phones and partly thanks to modernity, as someone acute said before, the impulse is to create something new all the time and forget the past. So in that context too, how do we engage and how does this collection maybe engage people's emotions? Part of this, yeah.
I was wondering too about the sort of the affective agreement, the affective capacity of attention. A few weeks ago, I got into an argument that grew slightly heated at times with a Princeton philosopher who is writing a series of papers on thinking about. And I asked him for some clarification on whether thinking about is the same as paying attention to, whether thinking about involves looking, and he said if you're looking at something, you're thinking about it, and so this was when we began to have some disagreements. But where we had our real disagreement involved dreaming and hallucination. So he categorically ruled out dreaming about as falling under the umbrella of thinking about. I thought this just was implausible. I felt like this is not a semantic account I'm willing to buy into at this point. I mean, this just seems like a farce. And so we parted ways. Both agreed to disagree. But in thinking about attention and thinking about I've been wondering over the past few minutes whether it's to our benefit or not to dwell on, I almost use thinking about again, forms a classification for styles of attention.
Should we or shouldn't we?
I have avoided so far the normative language of should. I was also going to ask whether anyone has attended a performance at which phones were confiscated or sealed up, because I attended a performance like this at the start of August, and I don't think it materially enhanced attentiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Of course not.
Right, I mean it had the exact opposite. Like itching the entire time. My partner and I had a conversation that we then overheard other people in our row having, which was, I can't wait for the intercession so I can, get my phone and then pull it out. How many people are emailing me? And I was like, this speaks now to this sort of encroachments of the technological and the degree to which the technological generates anxiety. But there too, there is this question about the degree to which we are rendered incapable of separating ourselves from the appurtenances that generate a satisfaction without which we feel strangely displaced or profoundly disquieted, insufficient.
If I understood your point correctly, I didn't suggest that at any level and by any means that we have to demonize the digital or these ways of connection. I think that the most important point you just made was the fact that it's absolutely impossible to separate the physical from the digital nowadays. The two are interconnected to such an extent that, as a colleague of mine suggested, we should build new rules for, like Newtonian physics established new rules about time and space. We have to do the same for this new space that is being created, this new time that is being created through the mingling of the physical and the digital.
And virtual.
But it-
Has somehow the digital, because we have this idea that the digital is something which is not physical, but it is physically stored somewhere, it's
physical.
physically. So
It is physical,
what
and it's
would-
not.
You being an archaeologist and so much interested in
Virtual communities.
and also in the digital, what would be the archaeology of the digital?
Oh, what a question. I don't know where to begin. I would have to come up with tons of lections.
We use that as an infusion, I wanna just
On the
move on
geology
so
of-
Costas doesn't get
The
squeezed.
geology of media, Yosi
Because I think we should not go any later than 7, because the reservation is 7:30. Is that
Yeah.
And I don't want to get you squeezed, everybody, and also people's attention wanes. So,
Κωστή,
Ακουστείς
να
later maybe
κάτσεις
not
εδώ.
to...
Κάνουμε ό,τι
Θέλεις να κάτσεις εδώ για να σε